I'm chair of the Immigrant Affairs and Human Rights Committee. We will be starting shortly. The president of the council was very committed to these issues, and this agenda will be here. He was off campus and got delayed, but he's within our reach, and he'll be here within a minute or two. So just give us 1 minute. Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Gil Cedillo. This is the Immigrant Affairs, Civil Rights, and Equity Committee. We are going to start. We will take care of some administrative matters. Initially, we have items 1 through 4 on consent. Any objection, Mr. Rue, Mr. Price? Okay, so those 4 items are dispensed with. Those are the appointments, and we are very happy and congratulate all the nominees with their appointment. Let me begin by thanking all of you for being here. I recognize in the crowd groups like Indivisible, Highland Park, that is experiencing a little roll of victories right now. Chirla, that has stepped up and done a great job in terms of leadership this week. I see people from the community that I'm familiar with, and I've seen them over the years. Let me say to you that the school board president, Raf Rodriguez, could not attend, but is in Sacramento and expressed his commitment to our efforts, as well as Nativo Lopez from Hermandad Mexicana, who had also planned to be here. Before we hear from Peter Shea, let me begin by thanking all of you for being here. You know, this committee was appointed to address the concerns around immigration and the concerns about our funding and whether or not we were encumbered because we received federal grants from the government, and what its impacts were on matters like Special Order 40, the mayor's executive directive, and other motions that we introduced and will introduce. Under the leadership of Herb Wesson, we created this standing committee, which is now a permanent committee. This committee's not going to focus only on immigrant affairs, but also other matters related to migration, diasporas, human rights, multiculturalism, race and ethnic relations, diversity, social and restorative justice. These are matters that confront the city each and every day and challenge us to be a greater city with each incident and with each Angelino that is challenged by these circumstances. So I want to thank the President as he heads towards here. I see his staff entering the room. But I also want to say that this week there's ironies this week. Yesterday we celebrated Latino Heritage Month. We had Romulo Velica here with us. He has become the face of the immigrant rights struggle. He has given a great example of what the immigrant contribution is to the city, and we're so pleased that he was out and is now out and able to spend time with his family. His incredible family, his daughters that are, each and every single one of them are brilliant. But also on the other side, we had the announcement that came from Washington. The White House has indicated their intention to end the Daca program if Congress does not act within the next 6 months. This is shameful. This is a continuation that cannot be tolerated of the divisiveness that's been created by the Trump administration. That began with their very first statements attacking immigrants from Mexico and all immigrants, and then continued on to attack a whole range of communities that are vital to the American experience. And so this committee today will hear next from Peter Shea, who is one of the top attorneys in this area, and then we will proceed with motions to be introduced tomorrow and in the upcoming time period. I apologize. This city is a large organization, and we try to move as fast as we can, but in many instances our organization and our bureaucracies simply take as long as they take. We would all like to do more than we can, but we have to respect that process. Process is part of what we do, and it keeps us accountable and transparent, and so we remain committed to it. Nonetheless, we will move with all speed, both tomorrow and forward, to address the concerns that are before us, to continue to reach out and work with all people. We make ourselves available and accessible to each and every one of you, because in this struggle and in this issue, we are one. So I thank you. I am prepared to introduce the President if he is ready, and Mr. Price, if you want to make some comments before we open up to public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your leadership along with our council president. I appreciate being a member of this committee charged with doing important work during an important time. The news earlier this week signaling the beginning of the end of Daca is painful, it's cruel, and it's shameful. We should not become paralyzed, however, during this critical time, but rather spring into action to right these wrongs. This Saturday, for example, I will be hosting, along with our partner organization, Carecen, an emergency Renew Daca Now event at Ross Snyder Rec Center from 9 to 3 p.m. The Rec Center is located at 1501 East 41st Street. More information is posted on the New Ninth website and on my Facebook page. But this is part of an ongoing partnership with the Central American Resource Center. This free event is being held in conjunction with the Citizenship Application Assistance Workshop, also by Carecen. And it seeks to help dreamers whose DACA permits expire March 5th, 2018, or earlier, to renew their application before the crucial October 5th, 2017 deadline. Carecen will continue to work with my office to host a series of events to provide free legal services to as many eligible dreamers as possible. This City 9 initiative will also be carried out by our other partner organization, CHIRLA. Both of these organizations will help me ramp up efforts in my district to respond to this Daca, the threat of the Daca repeal. If you're as angry as I am, please stand up and let your voice be heard. Most importantly, we have the power to do something about this unjust and inhumane action. I urge you to call Congress, throw your support behind a local immigrant rights organization, but more importantly, be there for our dreamers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking leadership on this issue, and and for your eloquent statements, as well as Councilmember Price's eloquent statements. And I don't want to reiterate the fact of what's going on and this huge disappointment in what's going on in Washington, D.C., and with the announcement of Daca. I just want to make it short and simple and say I stand with the Dreamers. I am proud to be on the City Council. I am proud to be on this committee. Really want to thank the vision and leadership of Council President Wesson for creating this committee. The first meeting I had with the Council President when I got elected 2 years ago was about, David, we need to have a discussion about race. And I'm trying to think of something, and I want to create something. Do you want to be on it? And I said, thank you. Of course I do. And it turns out, even on our City Council, there's 15 of us. And out of the 15, 2 of us are immigrants. And when you say 2 immigrants, there are 2 immigrants on the City Council, you automatically assume must be the 2 Latino members or the Latino members. I, along with another member, am an immigrant. So it's about perceptions, it's about misinformation, and it's about dispelling all of this and the fact that we need to celebrate our diversity and come together. That's why I'm so proud to be on this committee. And on top of that, as an immigrant, as a person of color who, luckily my mom as a nurse was able to attain a green card, and because my mom had a permanent residency, when I turned 18, I became a citizen. But I was this close to becoming undocumented. I could have been one of the Dreamers. And even though we were permanent residents, I still remember my mother and my grandmother telling me when I was in junior high and high school to behave. Don't get in trouble. Don't join a gang. Don't do anything because we might get deported. And we had a green card. So this is the fear. So just imagine our Dreamers who are here undocumented, how much fear they themselves and their families have. This is a land of immigrants. This is a representation for all. This is a personal issue to me, that it could have been me. I know I have plenty of friends and people that I know that are near and dear to me and close to me who are in this situation. So I want the public to know that I stand with you. I stand with the Dreamers. I stand with immigrants. So does the City Council. So does the City of Los Angeles. So I just really want to thank everybody in the audience for being here today. This is the whole reason the Council President had the foresight. I mean, it's unfortunate we're in this situation, but he felt the need that something will be happening or something might happen, and unfortunately it did. So we are prepared. We have been prepared. We have been working on this. This is why we created the Justice Fund. So I just really want to thank the audience because we're going to be in partnership and working together. I still remember working with CHIRLA and doing immigration rallies when I was in college. But I'm still glad that we're all here together still fighting the good fight. And I want you to know that we are standing with you together in unison. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cedillo. And again, I too want to thank everybody for coming. I'm going to do the very best I can to keep my remarks brief. This is very important. This is bigger than Daca. All you have to do is look around this horseshoe, and I think it's obvious to all where we stand on that issue and that we're going to do everything on this council to protect all of the residents of this city. But this is bigger than just that. This is an attack on our way of life. And I think that it's important that we're seeing pickets and protests and people emotional and upset, people making demands. But I think that it's the responsibility of this council to keep our calm, to be cool, to stay focused, and to recognize that we are in the beginning of a 4-year sparring match with the federal government. So we have to have our emotions under control, and we have to jab, step, fade, feint, do whatever it takes so that we can keep this fight alive and ultimately win the game. But in order to do that, we have to be smart. Now, as we have these people that are out protesting and picketing, we need them badly. But I think they look to us at Los Angeles to do something real and to do something substantive. So that's why I'm excited about this discussion that we're going to have with Mr. Shea, our immigrant advocate. And I think we need to just really kick things into gear and to try to make things happen. I think that it's important for us not to let the federal government make this a issue of dark people, because it is not an issue of people of color. The majority of individuals that are in this country that are undocumented are not from Latino countries. This is an attack on all of us. And so we need to create this diverse, broad range group of support to send this message to Washington, D.C., and to lead, and I put the operative word is lead, the rest of the major cities in this country. So that's why it's important that we have people from Europe that have issues where it relates to documents, people from the Latin American countries, people from African countries, people from Asian countries. It's important that we stand up and get things going. So I'm excited. I want to get started, and I would like for us to creatively come up with some calls for action today. So with that said, Mr. Chair, and I'll just say this where it relates to you, we're fortunate to have you. You are this committee was, when I envisioned it, it was created with you in mind.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so I'm putting a lot of pressure. No, or let me just say no pressure. But I'm proud of the members on this committee, and I'm in advance proud of the work I know we're going to do.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for your leadership, and let's do this. Joseph Villela from Chirla, please come forward.
Good afternoon, members of the council. My name is Joseph Villela. I'm here on behalf of Chile, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights in Los Angeles. President Trump's hateful rhetoric on campaign now became a reality. He has not only issued executive orders to ban Muslims to enter the country, increase interior enforcement into our country, but then also build a wall. Recently, he rescinded Daca. This council and this committee has moved forward to trying to counter and mitigate some of these actions. My comments are going to be very general and trying to provide some further recommendations. One, we would like the council to do a delegation to Washington, D.C. to move forward with a DREAM Act, a clean DREAM Act, and take Dreamers with you. Second, we would like to also increase capacity in regards to DACA fees. Chile has established a trust fund to make sure that folks receive not only free legal services, but then also assistance to pay for the fee, which is about close to $500. We would also like to remind this council that there has been some immigrant ordinances that have been passed and have not been effective, such as the city ID and the street vending ordinance, and we want them to become in fruition. Lastly, we have not been able to read the analysis of the study from the policy advocate, so we look forward to those recommendations and actually work in true partnership with him and this council. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Aldering.
Hi there. Thank you for having this committee, and thank you for inviting us to speak. My name is Brian Ellerding. I'm from a neighborhood in Los Angeles called Highland Park, and I am literally seeing my neighbors being affected, terrorized by the federal immigration policies being enacted these days. As been mentioned, they are cruel, and worse than that, they're arbitrary. And we are a nation of laws. If we are to feel safe here, and we want our neighbors to feel safe, which I very much do, I would like to see an ordinance here in Los Angeles. I understand we're going to learn a bit about this today, that protects my neighbors from this kind of fear that they live under now, fear of calling the police for being deported. So ideally, I would like to see some sort of wall between federal immigration enforcement and local law enforcement, and whatever else you can do to protect the people that I've grown to love in my neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tessie Borden. Tessie Borden. Okay. We'll hold her card. Deborah Falb.
Thank you. My name is Deborah Falb. I'm also from Indivisible Highland Park. And I just wanted to say that this week we have seen numerous DACA recipients overcome their fears to stand up and speak out. It is now time for our city leaders to overcome their fears, to keep their promises, and to do everything in their power, no matter the risk to their careers, to protect the people among us who are most truly at risk. There's no excuse for standing by while our neighbors, fellow students, and colleagues are intimidated by the federal government and terrified for their futures. As Mayor Garcetti this week called on Congress, thank you for the words. Now it is time to act. We can't rely on or put the blame on the feds anymore. We must deliver our promise to protect LA residents without papers by passing a strong sanctuary ordinance that will make Los Angeles a strong sanctuary city now. Thank you.
Scott Doyle.
You called her.
Tessie, come up.
Thank you to this committee for your work and for your future work. We're watching closely, and we've got a lot of expectations. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's been happening this week.
Herman, please sit down. You're not going to be tolerated today, Herman. This is your first warning.
I want to just talk a little bit about what happened with the young people this week and the way that this administration has been treating them. They had the protection of a program that was not encoded into law by Congress. It was simply something that had been put together by the president, and we understand some of the reasons why that had to happen that way. But what happened with them is what made me think that it's really important to have a strong sanctuary ordinance that protects our rights and keeps our community safe by drawing a clear, bright line between the local police and federal immigration agents. Knowing who does what helps community members interact successfully with police. And having it encoded into law is very, very important. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Doyle.
Good afternoon. First, I'm very happy to see this committee reconvened as a permanent standing committee and with an expanded mission and scope, because the issues affecting immigrants and civil rights issues are very much connected. In a lot of ways, the mass deportation system and the mass incarceration system are intimately linked, and we look forward to seeing this committee address them. Tessie already anticipated one of my points, and I'll just repeat it again, that unless protections for immigrants are encoded in law, we've seen this week that they will be extremely vulnerable. Second, I think the announcement about DACA shows that with this administration, nothing is sacred. Every immigrant has a target on their back, and that, piggybacking on the council president's point, this is beyond DACA. It's an attack on our way of life, a threat to due process and a threat to liberty for some is an attack on all. Finally, in closing, if I can just make one last point, I hope we keep our eyes on the big picture and realize that all immigrants are dreamers, and that in defending the DACA students, we defend all other dreamers as well. Thank you.
Jesse Wessler.
just quickly to bring up SB 54 in the state. And right now, the governor is seeking to change what we have there already. And you may be aware of that. I just wanted to put in my own thoughts on it, asking you to be very, very strong in speaking to the governor to make no changes at all and leave it as it has been since it was originally created, and what he said he was going to do, very, very strongly stating that, because he was going to stand for the state of California. We need you to go speak to him and make it stay that way. Thank you very much.
Special guest, Rose Matsui. Ochai? Rose?
Rose,
I saw her, she walked in.
right here.
Where is she?
Rose?
Rose, you're up.
Rose.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Rue, I don't know if you've ever met Rose before, but if there was ever a trailblazer, she's one. It's so good to see you.
Yep.
Yeah.
She's a giant.
Good afternoon. My name is Rose Ochi, and I'm here in support of Daca and Peter Shea. Actually, I'd like to go back to World War II when Italians and few Germans and all Japanese Americans were rounded up, and we were taken to Tuna Canyon first, and then I spent 4 years in one of America's concentration camp. But I'm here to say that when I served on the Immigration Commission, I became very familiar with these issues. I support Daca, and I'm here to join the City Council, and I praise you because in World War II, no one was there for Japanese. No one.
She knows what she talks about. Thank you. Bravo. I have Herman.
You want communication between government agencies and Immigration Natural Services? Well, let me bring to regards the DACA. But first of all, let's talk about illegal immigrants in our country, the United States. While we have a population of people dying and suffering, veterans that are homeless, veterans that can't have a home, and the HHH promises. You, Assemblyman Cedillo and Mr. Price, came from Sacramento. What promises and what regards to reform regarding racialism, ethnic equalities, and the observance of fundamental human rights? Not one fucking thing, for the record. In addition to that, when Mr. Roybal was a U.S. Senator, he was an immigrant, but he became a citizen. So pay your fucking dues and get in line and help them out become citizens. Fuck you.
Your time's up. Denita Huerta, please. Up there.
Excuse me, I was just a little taken back. So let's pray here, because that's who's in charge of this. And there is nothing, nor no one who can stop what a mother will do to protect her child of all colors, of all nationalities, and of all religions. I stand here on behalf of the unruly, the attitude crew, the women who are tired of waiting to be heard. We need you, each and every one of you, to do what you do, that you've done, that each and every one of you have a legacy. Each and every one of you have to do things that none of us fully understand, but now it's your turn to show us, to get behind us. How many marches, how many committees, how many times? Well, one more time, sir, I believe in each and every one of you. Let's get it done.
Thank you. That concludes public comment. I thank almost each and every one of you. So we're going to close public comment now, and we will move forward to our next agenda item, Mr. Peter Shea. He needs no introduction, but he deserves one. He is, I would say, the preeminent attorney in immigration and has done probably more than any American using the legal system to help bring people out of the shadows and into the mainstream. I have known him personally for about 40 years, but he started much before that. And we'd like him to come up and bring his report with him, a report that we've been waiting for called LA Safe, a report that we will look for as a guide to execute follow-up motions and ordinances. Please come forward.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to read it into the record?
I would. Thank you.
Item number 5 is a presentation and verbal report by the city's immigrant advocate, Peter Shea, relative to the status and updates regarding immigrant matters.
Mr. Shea, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chairman Cedillo, and thank you, President Wesson, for the support that you have shown for both this committee and then for my appointment to provide direction. And thank you to Mr. Room, Mr. Price, Council Members Room and Price for their participation, not just in this committee, but in ongoing, continuous work aimed at the protection of both immigrants and all marginalized minorities in the city of Los Angeles. It's an honor to be here, and I'm happy today to have presented you with my first report. I'll try to provide a brief overview of that report and also of the motivations for the various parts of that report. Recently, the President of the United States used, in referring to North Korea, he used the term something to the effect of, it was time for the United States to respond with fire and fury, and not in any way indicating any opinion on his remarks in that regard. I do think that his overall assault and his administration's overall assault, not just on immigrants, but on a range of minorities, people with disabilities, transgender people, Muslims, etc. List goes on. I think the time has come for fire and fury in our response. And I think that response has to initially come from local elected officials. It's going to come from the streets. It's going to come from community-based organizations. It's going to come from labor leaders, from faith-based leaders. We've seen in the past week, in response to the Daca, from business leaders. There's no question. But pivotally important, critically important, is what cities, counties, and states can do in response. Business leaders cannot legislate. Student leaders cannot legislate. Community organizations cannot legislate. You, as elected officials, can legislate. So I think this is a critical time for a local response. And before I get into the details, and I know you're familiar with this, but just to set the stage, I think it's important to realize that President Trump's announcement on Daca this week was really, he sent out Jeff Sessions to make the announcement, but the announcement they made this week with regards to Daca, effectively putting at risk 800,000 young people, about 30% of whom are attending school, thousands, tens of thousands of whom live in the city of Los Angeles. That's just the most recent announcement of this type. And so just to fully understand, I want to remind you of the scope of some of his other announcements and policies, because ultimately the proposals that I'm making to you are not limited to protection of immigrants, because I see a wide range of marginalized, low-income folks facing extreme danger, discomfort, displacement, alienation from this administration. So that I think, yes, in a sense, the immigrant community is kind of the nail President Trump is most focused on, but other minority communities are not far behind. And I think that becomes clear with his travel ban. His travel ban tended to focus on Muslim immigrants, Muslim visitors. Jeff Sessions announcing his instructions to prosecutors nationwide to have apps to pursue maximum criminal sentences. No concern for racial disparity in sentencing, no concern for racial disparity in incarceration. Just seek maximum sentences, knowing full well that the force of that policy will land for the very most part on the shoulders of people of color. His efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act, you're all aware of that, would have left tens of millions of poor people without medical care. His direction to bar transgender people from participating in the military. Jeff Sessions' recent announcement just a few weeks ago that the Trump administration is going to divert resources from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. And what brilliant activity are they going to put that into? They're going to dedicate that to suing colleges and universities that are doing anything to help minority admissions. His budget would decrease by some $70 billion. Funding for Social Security's programs for people with disabilities. He has a $190 billion reduction over 10 years in food stamps, restrictions on food stamps, recipients, able-bodied adults, tossed off the food stamp program. He's also rescinded Title IX protections, federal Title IX protections for transgender students. I think my point is made. Yes, yesterday, Tuesday, was an attack on Daca students. But when you look beneath that page in the book, it's been an attack across the board on a wide range, not of white, well-to-do people, not of the haves, but a wide range of actions against the have-nots, many including this 35% base that he has, who just don't seem to get it. Now let me turn to my proposals with that background, and please feel free to interrupt me anytime with questions. Firstly, I have set out what I believe are several actions that the city can take that I think, and again, it's sort of a descending order based on how urgent things are. Right now, things are extremely urgent for Daca people. They're also extremely urgent for immigrant communities. So I've tried to create a hierarchy somewhat. I have two fundamental proposals, maybe three. The first involves programs, funding, resources of the city. And the second, which I'll address second, involves enactment of a model, a nationwide model, comprehensive human rights, anti-discrimination ordinance with real teeth, with severe penalties, and with administrative mechanisms for people to exercise their rights that would not require them to engage in lengthy, costly court proceedings. That'll be the second part. With regards to the first part, which is really a focus on programs, resources, activities. What I've done in this report, is not really to present my ideas. It's really to present a synthesis of ideas gathered through numerous meetings, discussions, conversations with the impacted communities. Whether they were Latino, whether they were Asian, whether they were Korean, whether they were Muslim, Christian, you name it, labor, faith-based, business, folks who I met with, including undocumented students, undocumented Daca recipients, undocumented parents of U.S. citizens, etc. So these are not my ideas. They're really the ideas from the impacted communities, the stakeholders in this entire situation. In discussing with the immigrant communities, and in particular DACA recipients, what is the most important thing to you that we as a city could be doing? The resounding and the consistent response, which when you think about it, I don't think is terribly surprising, because it's the same response you'd get in most marginalized, at-risk communities. Their first response was, prevent my arrest. If I don't get arrested, I'm not going to get detained in a dangerous situation, in some lockup, separated from my family, extreme difficulty connecting with legal counsel, all hearings expedited, so your due process is put at risk. Number one thing of importance to me is not to get arrested. When I've talked to young U.S. citizens, 16, 17 years old students whose mother or father is undocumented, I say, what's the most important thing city could do for you? Those kids will say, anything you could do to prevent my mother or father from getting arrested. So,
We want to ask you a question.
absolutely.
If it's okay, when you gave permission, you said at any time during your presentation,
Absolutely.
we could just jump in. Okay, I share your concern. I've had some conversations with you and conversations with folk in the community, and I would concur that the biggest concern is being stopped and what happens during that initial stop. So it is my understanding that a significant percentage of individuals that wind up in a deportation process are based on things that occurred that very first time that they were stopped or interviewed or what have you. So in my opinion, and I see you have some ideas, I'd like for you to share with us what can we do. And I'm supportive, and I get all of these, the Know Your Rights seminars and what have you, but what I'm seeing here is something that could become substantive, where it relates to a way to preemptively get legal counsel for folk or what have you. Can we take a minute and talk about that?
Absolutely.
So let me ask you, if I were to be stopped, and if I were asked by the ICE agents or what have you, am I legally in this country or what have you, if I'm just walking down the street, then I would, I guess, respond. What I'm seeing here is the possibility of creating documents or letters for people from attorneys in good standing that would indicate, that could be shown to these officers, indicating I'm represented by the firm of Cedillo, Wesson, Rue, and Price, and I have been advised not to respond, or and so what would, in the event we did something like that, which is very intriguing and I think could work, I'd like, from a legal perspective, if you could expand on that a little bit. I think that that would be one of the most proactive things that we as a city could do.
Herman, I already gave you one warning. This is your second. I'm going to ask you to leave if you don't control yourself.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm happy to respond to that question. That's an excellent question. I have had the opportunity to, over the years, to represent large numbers of groups of people who were potentially subject to arrest, whether they were on strike and they were subject to arrest by sheriff's departments as a group, or whether they were immigrants subject to arrest as a group. And in my experience, providing what are called charlers in the community, but basically they're meetings, educational meetings to explain people what their rights are. And I should say at the outset that there is no question, it is legally, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals just issued a decision a couple weeks ago on this subject, but it is universally agreed in all the federal courts and in Department of Homeland Security and in ICE. It is universally agreed that because there are potential criminal consequences that may be associated with illegal presence in the United States, that people who are confronted by ICE agents or questioned by ICE agents unquestionably have a constitutional and a federal right to remain silent. It is also unquestionably accepted by all players that persons contacted by ICE have a right to counsel, they have a right to legal counsel. About the only place that may not apply is somebody who's contacted like at a port of entry. It's a bit more questionable, but certainly anybody contacted in the interior parts of the United States has the right to the presence of counsel. Now, it is important to understand that unlike the LAPD or the LA County Sheriff's Department for that matter, which by and large pursue criminals based on investigation, and when the investigation is close, when they feel they have probable cause to arrest somebody, what do they typically do? They go get an arrest warrant. They do not engage in randomized law enforcement. They don't just walk the streets and sort of bust people here and there. Obviously, if they see a crime being committed in their presence, they're authorized and responsible for arresting that person. But short of that, they don't walk up and just question people about, have you committed any crimes recently? ICE does not operate that way. For the most part, there are some investigations by ICE that follow that pattern, but the great majority of ICE enforcement is randomized. It is based on fear. It takes place in public places, bus stops, train stations, on the streets, outside movie theaters.
So let me interrupt you. So suppose that happens to me. I'm at a bus stop and a ICE agent comes up to me and begins to ask questions, and I reach into my pocket and I give him a document, again, that says I'm represented by Mr. Cedillo and Mr. Wesson, and I've been advised not to talk to you. Please contact my attorney. What do the ICE officials do then?
In the vast majority of cases, other than the cases where the ICE agent violates the law, and those do happen, but I like to think that's a minority of cases. In the vast majority of cases, that officer will stop any questioning of that individual. And indeed, the representation letter can specifically state to the ICE agent that any questioning of this individual, any further questioning of this individual, would be a violation of federal law. When that type of letter is presented, the holder, the bearer of that letter, is far less likely to succumb to fear if they don't have that letter and they've only been trained about their rights. Fear overcomes them. Or the training was 8 months ago and they forget about the details of the training. And in my experience, probably 75% of cases where the person has only received the training, by the time they get stopped by an ICE agent 8, 12 months later, they've forgotten the training, and either way, fear overcomes them.
Okay, well, Mr. Chairman, what I'd like for us to do, Mr. Chairman, what I would like to recommend to this committee is that we engage our CLA or CAO, and I mean, let us create a program. Mr. Shea referenced Charles, where imagine a day where we had 7 Charlas going on at different locations within the city of Los Angeles. We engaged our legal community. I am certain that we would have an overwhelming number of attorneys that would want to volunteer to be part of this program. We highly publicize it. Like I said, 7 different locations. People could come. What I would do, I'd take it a step further. I would make them spend 2 minutes or so chatting with an attorney, pay them $1, have that letter. We need to look at a way of creating some kind of, at Mr. Shea's recommendation and yours, an app where if a person is out and they don't have this, let's be smart. Let's be tactical. And if we're talking about Los Angeles setting an example, then let's be smart. Let's outspar this guy. So I would like to have the CLA, CAO, or maybe the city attorney or whatever city department sit down, quickly flesh out this program. Because if you then give this letter, this document, to the authority that is trying to hassle you, and that makes them go away, then we should do that. And I don't see that being unbelievably expensive at all. And so, other than talking about it, and I would need some help from one of our people here, what would we need to do, this committee, to get the process moving on creating something like that? What would we have to do?
One of the things we can do is possibly draft a motion for your office and instruct the appropriate entities to come back with a program.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would recommend that you and I engage, co-author, and maybe we can get some help from other members of this committee. I know we will have we have problems because of quorum issues. But see, that's something that gives hope. See, that's real. That's more than a march. That's more than a letter. That's more than a protest. That's giving something to people that they have in their pocket. And I think that that's a brilliant idea, Mr. Shea, and one of the reasons why we're fortunate to have you here. The other question that I have is where it relates to when individuals are actually detained and I guess arrested or whatever the proper. The information that I've received would lead me to believe that individuals who do not make bail are the more vulnerable to being deported quicker
True.
than those that make bail.
Very true.
Okay, so if you're talking to people and they're saying, my concern is getting detained, getting arrested, then let's come up with something that deals with those two main concerns. Let's try to reduce the arrests, and let's try to put resources or at least come up with a plan to help where it relates to that getting out on bail or bond or whatever it's called. How do we do that?
I think that is critically important. Just to wrap up the discussion about the representation letter, it is, and you did ask me what would happen if you had a letter like that, and I responded that in the vast majority of situations, I cannot put an exact percentage on it, but indeed, if an ICE officer kept questioning somebody in order to develop probable cause, in order to arrest that person, even though that person had presented that ICE officer with a letter instructing, saying that this person is represented by counsel, this person's exercising her or his right to remain silent, this person does not want to be questioned outside of the presence of counsel, etc. In my experience, the great majority of, and I don't know what that means percentage-wise, but a very large number of ICE officers do follow the law. And if they follow the law, they will terminate questioning. They will not develop probable cause to arrest that person. And just to wrap up this part of the discussion, it doesn't leave ICE helpless. ICE knows where all these people live. ICE knows where where pretty much all of the Daca recipients live. ICE knows where another 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 people, undocumented people in Los Angeles live because they're in the system. They're seeking visas. So certainly with regards to the DACA recipients, if ICE wants to interview those people, it should send them a letter. What I'm trying to avoid are mass arrests, unnecessary arrests, arrests that are traumatic, arrests that are randomized, because those are not good for the health and safety of Los Angeles, whether they were conducted by ICE, by sheriffs, by local police. I don't care who conducts those kinds of operations. They're not good. They're unsafe, et cetera, et cetera.
Would you be able to provide us with someone from your staff to work with the city department as we try to draft this policy?
Absolutely.
Okay, because that's what I'd like
absolutely.
to do.
And now, with regards to the second point that you raised.
Let me
yes.
add, though, Mr. President, we have precedent for this. We have this days of dialogue that takes place in the city and the county. You may recall that. During the struggle for the driver's license, there was the exploitation of immigrants. Their cars were being taken from them. They were being towed. And we were able to develop a card that laid out the law and the limits of the law, and they could hand that card to the police officers to inform them that this was a suspect towing. So we do have some experience in these matters. My district is well represented, Chirla, Indivisible. Other groups are here. I'm sure we would look forward to setting up and participating in these workshops throughout the city.
I would make it huge.
Yes.
I would make it, you want to send a message, you do something like that that's substantive that the world will watch. And I've learned, since I did grow up in the civil rights movement, as did you, as did Mr. Price, we have to take advantage of these types of opportunities. Mm-hmm. And I think with the experience that you had dealing with driver's license and that, and that this is something that we should put together quickly and plan it. It should be an LA city-based thing so that we can send the message to New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Memphis, and the other major cities. Because I think that they look to us. And if they're looking to us, let's give them something to see. Great. And so I'd like for us to do something that is real and substance. I believe that it's our responsibility and that the local government needs to lead the way. So that's my recommendation, and I just want to see if there's consensus
Yes.
on this committee to move forward with that.
Mr. Rue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. President, for those thoughts. And I don't want to preempt the chair, and I'm sure you're going to introduce the motion, but you know, if I could just make a suggestion, I mean, the full report by Peter Shea is very comprehensive and very good, and I'd love for the motion, maybe to have two motions. One, to ask our CLA and CAO and city attorney to see how we could implement all of the recommendations in here. But when it comes to recommendation one, is exactly what the council president was talking about, that we have a motion immediately to basically make Los Angeles a dreamer arrest-free zone. And with that includes those two components of the letters of representation by nonprofit lawyers, legal groups, and secondarily, immediate bond hearings to secure the prompt release of any arrested dreamer. So I think that motion could be written up and introduced immediately, while the rest of it probably needs a little bit more time. But I think just to make that statement that Los Angeles will be a dreamer arrest-free zone will be making that announcement.
I agree.
Right.
I agree.
Yes, sir. Mr. Price?
I heartily agree with my colleagues on this, and I know there's consensus building in the room already. But just a quick question. Currently, the Justice Fund only would assist those in mandatory detention. Do you understand that to be the case, Mr. Shea? Or can people released on bail qualify? Could they qualify for funds under the city's Justice Fund, for example?
Yeah, I'm not, I mean, I can answer your question, but I'm not sure I can answer it in specific with regards to the Justice Fund, just because that is, I guess, somehow now in the hands of whoever at the California Community Foundation, and I guess different organizations have submitted proposals. I think those proposals were due by the end of July. The Justice Fund focused in an immediate sense, because I think it was the sense of many of the local community-based organizations that somehow the most immediate concern was functionally people in mandatory detention who were also in deportation hearings. This focus that I have here today is a little bit different and a little bit more long range, because my focus is a little bit more on how do you help people to ensure they're not subjected to an unnecessary arrest in the first place. And which again is not to say ICE cannot do its business. ICE can easily do its business without arresting people. I've had hundreds of clients placed into removal proceedings without them ever being arrested. They would just get a piece of paper saying your first appointment. Often they get a piece of paper saying, we will send you another piece of paper when we finally have your appointment, and then they finally send them a piece of paper saying you go see the immigration court on such and such a date. So my focus is a little bit more on, number one, preventing arrests in the first place. Number two, if people are arrested, and again, when I spoke to a large number of immigrant families, immigrant folks who work for immigrants, their second biggest concern after not getting arrested was, if I do get arrested, how quickly can I get out of custody? There are numerous disadvantages. I can tell you, because I just recently represented a couple of people in custody. I couldn't even have attorney-client confidential phone calls with them. And I can do that with my client, Matulu Shakur, who's in his 30th year of a federal prison sentence. I can have confidential conversations with him. I cannot have confidential. They just don't have the facilities. So representation, many of these folks will be detained, not right here in downtown LA, but in other locations. So just communicating with your client in a confidential way, or for your client to communicate with you, becomes extremely, extremely difficult. Secondly, in many of these cases, as in a criminal case, the participation of the client in the preparation of the defense or affirmative applications you may want to file. So some of these folks in in custody eligible for different political asylum, withholding of deportation, protection from torture, U visas for victims of violent crimes, survivors of domestic violence, or you name it, special immigrant juveniles. There's about 8 ways you can potentially, 8 affirmative applications you can present in a deportation hearing. When you're locked up and cannot participate in the preparation of those applications, which often involve statements, declarations from your friends, your relatives, your school records, your medical records, all that kind of stuff, it makes preparation when you're in custody extremely difficult. Thirdly, if you're in custody, as I think either the chairman or the president mentioned earlier, or maybe it was Councilmember Rue, your hearing is going to be a lot quicker. Because you're in custody, you're going to be railroaded through a hearing within probably a couple of months. Now let's say, not to mention, I haven't even begun to mention the human side, that you're separated from your spouse, you're separated from your children, if you're a dreamer, you're blocked from going to school. I had a case like that a couple of years ago where a young university student was blocked from going to school for a year. Then they terminated his student visa because he didn't go to school. He only didn't go to school because he was in custody. So of course, if you're working, it's tremendous hardships, and everybody knows that. You don't have to be an immigrant to have those problems. You could be anybody, get arrested, placed in a custodial situation. Anything you can possibly do to get out of that custodial situation becomes of the utmost importance to you. Now, on the other hand, if the person is released, you alleviate all those problems, and incredibly, your deportation hearing will now be in 18 months or 24 months. So you really have to begin to look at this carefully to say, well, gee whiz, if you had a real focus on release in terms of future city funding, you perhaps need less funding for people who are incarcerated in deportation hearings because you've hopefully got everybody released. And in fact, my position is there's 2 types of detention, discretionary and mandatory. If lawyers, if LA ensures that lawyers are treating these bail hearings seriously, not just a 3 or 4 hour dedication of resources, but a 30-hour dedication of resources. So you're putting on your mini case to convince the judge, I've got some real claims here, let me go, let me out on bond. My position is 100% of people arrested in Los Angeles who are subject to discretionary release, we should get them released. 100%. Nobody should be held in custody by ICE from Los Angeles simply because they're too poor to get out, or they couldn't afford a lawyer to do a decent bail hearing. It's a waste of lives. Now, turning to your question, there is a residue of people subject to mandatory detention. Those fall into 2 groups, basically. One is people with fairly serious criminal convictions, and the other is people who were previously deported and came back without inspection. And they get arrested, they're subject to mandatory detention, those 2 groups. Those are the groups that I think the Justice Fund focused on, and I totally support that. On the other hand, if your focus is on helping those 2 groups, mandatory detention people, a relatively small population, obviously, that's fine. Those people need that. But what shouldn't be ignored is a strong focus, which I don't think was ever clearly articulated in the Justice Fund. I don't think anybody, the focus was on the deportation hearings of people who could not get out of custody. I think there needs to be 2 new layers that are longer term. One layer is you prevent the arrest. You make LA basically an arrest-free zone. You want to, maybe I should say warrantless arrest-free. You want to go get a warrant. You've investigated the case, fine. Go get a warrant. What I'm trying to get at is a minimization of the randomized stuff. And number 2, if people do get arrested, they ought to get out on bond. Boom. Then their hearing gets put off for 2 years. The city probably doesn't have to fund a lawyer to represent them in 2 years. They're going to take care of themselves with 2 years to prepare for a deportation hearing. So it's sort of a longer range view Of course, the quicker we can get things off the ground, it doesn't have to be super long range. These things could be implemented very promptly.
Well, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, I vote for that second layer that
Okay.
he's referring to. We got to get there now.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Price, both the city attorney's office, both the Justice Fund and the special fund allocation via your motion would allow for legal services to people who are not yet in custody or in detention. Specifically to the Justice Fund portion of your question, the fund allows services to be provided to anyone who is at risk of removal, whether or not they are in detention. And it does prioritize the expenditure of the fund to certain categorizations, like the head of household, DACA students, U visa and T visa qualifiers.
Okay.
But you do not have to be in detention to actually access the Justice Fund at this moment in time.
That's great. It's the answer to the question, so that we merely have to replenish it or make sure that it's sufficiently funded, but there's no limit. The fund already exists, and it's just a matter of funding it sufficiently for this new population, or for the populations articulated. Great. So, you want to go to item 2, Mr. Mr. Shea?
So item 2 is a proposal for a model human rights ordinance in the city of Los Angeles that would provide protection against discrimination, against retaliation, against the use of threats, based on any city resident's protected status. What I have proposed is a fairly broad definition of protected status. I've looked at what other cities have done. I've looked at what other states have done. I've looked at what the federal government has done in terms of protected status. And I have erred on the side of inclusiveness as opposed to a restricted view of a protected status. So,
Mr. Shea,
yeah.
With that, I think the president wants to gin up our call for a sanctuary city. We're prepared to put that motion forward tomorrow. We've got, Mr. President, you want to?
Well, I want to join.
Some poetic.
I want to join with you, but I wanted to ask, because we are LA and we are different. Suppose it was, and I read this in one of your reports, instead of sanctuary city, a city of sanctuary. Is there a difference other than it sounds more inclusive, and it just has, it does have a little ring. A city of sanctuary. That would be our designation. Does that?
That's just fine with me. I mean, I guess one would have to consult with others. You know, people seem to have strong views on this name thing. And to be honest with you, my sense has always been that what's important, ultimately, yes, that sort of symbolic statement, we are a city of sanctuary or we're a city of refuge, etc. I certainly think it's important. It sets a certain tone. But if you do that without making substantive programs, without adopting substantive ordinances, then it's a real waste of time. So yeah, I think that I personally have no objections or
Well, there's no objection here on this side. Look, I think the point is driven very clearly on Tuesday. There are executive orders, and there are executive orders. There are times where, obviously, the highest preference is legislative action in the city. That means for us to do an ordinance. We have a rich tradition. Special Order 40 is, I think, 40 years old now, or if not more. Negotiated early on with Chief Gates. But the world's changed. These are very dynamic. At times, there's no more rules in politics. And we have a huge community in peril. And so I think it's imperative for us to move forward with a sanctuary city motion, whatever we call it. What's key is that we create the ordinances that stand the test of time and then move us beyond.
Sanctuary city or city of sanctuary.
That stand the test of time and move beyond directives and custom and practice, but actually move into letter of law.
It's on page 3. But, you know, Mr. Chair, maybe, and I'm sorry to throw everything off, Mr. Shea, maybe you could just quickly run through the highlights of and then I'll shut up. But just give us your, you know, this is what I think, this is what I think, this is what I think.
With regards to the ordinance, so number one, I have a fairly broad definition, but they all involve immutable characteristics. They all, and I don't have a group for, they all involve minority groups within the city of Los Angeles. The categories that I identified would include sexual preference issues, disability issues, birthright issues, nationality issues, etc., immigration status, race, national origin, or any other immutable characteristic. That language may bother the city attorney a bit in terms of, well, what do you mean by immutable characteristic? There are laws where that concept has been used over and over again in order to define a particular group of people. It generally means people who have a characteristic that is visible to the public that may result in them being targeted for some sort of discrimination or exploitation, and that they cannot sort of easily change. It could be marriage, for example. So that's number one. Number two, what I have tried to do is to create a set of provisions that would cover virtually every situation, every transaction that takes place in the city of Los Angeles, so that this would apply to landlords, it would apply to business owners, it would apply to employers, it would apply to anyone who's in a position to discriminate, intimidate, threaten people because they're in a position of power as compared to the person that they're discriminating against or retaliating against. So it's broad. Number three, I make clear in the language that it is not intended to conflict with or reduce any existing federal, state, or city rights that any of these individuals may currently possess. So should there be a city ordinance that's more powerful than the language I've written, or should there be a state ordinance or state law? I don't think there is, but should there be one, you're not giving up those rights through this ordinance. Next, I really considered, and in my discussions with folks, one thing that came up often was the difficulty that people have vindicating their rights if they've been discriminated against, threatened, retaliated against, vindicating their rights if they have to go into court. If they have to go into the superior court, the municipal court, it's costly, it means they've got to hire lawyers, it takes a long time, the courts are way backlogged, et cetera, et cetera. When I examined and researched this, there are several cities, including New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and L.A. has done it on some things. A recent ordinance that you paused dealing with the extent to which employers can use a person's criminal history in hiring that person, that has an administrative procedure to vindicate your rights. And I think that's critically important because that avoids low-income people are going to be reluctant to go to court, and not to mention undocumented people are going to be reluctant to go to court. But, you know, ICE, many reports about ICE wandering around the courts, sort of just looking to pick people up, same sort of randomized enforcement. So I think an administrative structure, I have suggested an administrative structure. I've not totally costed the thing out, but I plan to do that for you. I think that...
And we should direct our city people to do that as
Yeah, I mean, I think that that would be helpful. I think that this could be set up as a commission with maybe 9 members. I think that commission could be made up of experienced lawyers who would sort of adjudicate these claims. I think those lawyers could be recruited on a pro bono basis from law firms throughout the city of Los Angeles. So I think the actual members, the officials of the commission, I would see no need for those to be paid positions. I would think an executive director and maybe start out with 3 or 4 investigators and some clerical staff. I don't think you're looking at any
Well, why don't we just give them the concept? And then they'll
Exactly.
work with your office, you can give your recommendations. But conceptually, that discussion seems very valid and it should take place. I just want to make sure we get through every recommendation.
Right,
So what
and
is,
the final recommendation with regards to this city human rights ordinance are the penalties. And again, those can be discussed, those can be considered, others may, I'm sure, would want to weigh in. I suggest penalties that are substantial. You know, $10,000 for a first offense, $20,000 for a second offense, $30,000. New York, they can impose penalties up to $250,000. Their administrative structure. I also propose that this body would have the power to initiate misdemeanor criminal proceedings against repeat offenders, and that repeat offenders could face 6 months in jail. So I think if we're going to have an ordinance, and if our goal is, if we believe that promoting the health and the safety and the camaraderie and the diversity of the residents of the city of Los Angeles is inextricably tied to decreasing discrimination, decreasing racial inequality, decreasing exploitation, decreasing threats and exploitation, then you need real penalties. You know, I'm reminded, I used to work for the Select Commission on Immigration and Refugee Policy. Gil probably remembers this many, many years ago. And I think it was even during the Reagan administration. And they were the first group to come up with employer sanctions. And then Congress adopted employer sanctions in 1986. But you know, the employers were so good in lobbying the Congress because they didn't want employer sanctions. They didn't want to be told, oh, it's a problem if you hire undocumented people. They wanted a free hand. Well, Congress said, no, we're going to do this in return for the amnesty, 1986 amnesty, which President Reagan signed. We're going to, our enforcement piece is this employer sanctions. Well, they made sure that in reality the penalties were so light that it was just a cost of doing business. And so I don't think there's any point in us creating and adopting and embracing a real human rights initiative, an ordinance, in order to seriously attack discrimination, racial inequality, other kinds of discrimination in the city of Los Angeles, and then have a slap on the wrist. Makes no sense. So I've included pretty severe, you know, if it's a lightweight case, the adjudicator would always have the power to give a lightweight penalty, fine, damages, injunctions, whatever. But if it's a willful case, a serious case, they ought to have the ability to set an example and to make sure it happens as infrequently as possible in the city of Los Angeles. So in a nutshell, that is the proposal. As we've discussed, I have also suggested, but I think this is something that's longer range, more difficult. I have also suggested towards the end of the report, just very briefly, that at some point we initiate a discussion and a re-examination of some of the criminal penalties that are in the Los Angeles City Code that fall particularly heavily on the shoulders of poor people, of homeless people, and of marginalized people. These are ordinances about begging, ordinances about not moving on off the sidewalk, et cetera, So I think that's a long-range thing. I'm not suggesting we do that tomorrow or next week, but I think that is something that, to the extent we always talk about and are concerned about racial disparities in the Bureau of Prisons and racial disparities throughout the United States today in sentencing and who's brought before the criminal courts, we need to be sensitive about that here in the city of Los Angeles. And if we have some ordinances that criminalize conduct that we know is going to fall almost exclusively on the shoulders of people of low income, people of color, and homeless people, we might want to reassess and see if some of those criminal penalties can be converted to civil penalties. And you can certainly have, and I'll close with this, you can certainly convert some of those criminal penalties to civil penalties and have some sort of community service or participation in training programs.
You know, Mr.
try
Chair,
to help
this is
those folks.
That's a broader ongoing discussion. We've been engaged in that since we've been here, around street vendors,
right,
around homelessness, around sleeping in vehicles, sleeping in recreational vehicles. So that's an ongoing. I think this is the new forum for that discussion to begin with. But I think at this point, we'd like to take all the motion or the broader sweep of your report, send it to the CAO and the CLA. We'd like to fast track the recommendations on the Dreamers and their representation, and then tomorrow we're prepared to introduce a motion on sanctuary cities tomorrow, based on your recommendations. And so with that, colleagues, I think that is the order of the day. Objection? No objection.
No objection.
I think we've taken a appropriate response to the actions of earlier this week, and an appropriate response given the time that we have addressed this matter with the formation of this committee. Is that order clear?
Yes.
Clear as mud? Clear?
And if I could just say this to Mr. Shea, we really appreciate you. I know that you put a lot of time into the work that he's done, and people need to know that he's doing this pro bono, and that the city of Los Angeles is not paying for his services. And we appreciate that. And this is a very extensive, thought-out document. But I think that it also sends a message to other jurisdictions that if you look hard enough, there are experienced people that would be willing to help them based on the cause being just and not doing this for financial gain.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So you have our motion?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
We'll also work with your office to get further clarification.
Great. Any objection, Mr. Rue? Nope. Mr. Price? Nope. Mr. President, thank you. So be the order. We have some cleanup to do on public comment, but I want to thank everybody for being here. We've got to go back to items 1 through 4 for public comment. But other than that, once we finish public comments, we are prepared to end the meeting. Mr. Herman, you have 2 minutes to address items 1 through 4. One minute for 1 through 4, 1 minute public comment. 1 through 4 are appointments.
Well, let's look at Jackie Fila, Dr. Jackie. I sure hope you know what the hell you're getting yourself into, Jackie. It's a jacked up fucking system here. In regards to Herb, for Irma Gibson, not the Gibson that died, but the Gibson that has to deal with the bullshit of city ethics. Then let's go to item 3. Nancy Pearlman. Thank God it's not that bitch Nancy Pelosi for City Ethics Commission's status of women for the term of June. And then my final person, Ms. Zamora. Got nothing to say. I did a background check. No teen porn on her site. Now general public comment. In regards to the 8 U.S. Code Section 1373, Sacramento and legislative LA safe, never cared, do they? Immigrant reform, such a dream, all you dreamers, holding to words that don't matter. About DACA, D-A-C-A, do your goddamn job, congressmen and congresswomen, because nothing matters. No one, and neither you, never care. And all we know under Section 45.101, business, 45.120, facility services, and what about Section 45.103, education? Fuck you, enforcement, 45.107. 23-page report don't mean a goddamn
10
fucking
seconds.
thing. This is America. Do away with all these issues and do your goddamn fucking job, LA. Safe
5 seconds.
LA,
Your
and you're
time is
still a
up.
dreamer.
Okay. All matters have been addressed.
Just as long as you now move the motion again for items 1 through 4.
I move items 1 through 4. Mr. Rue?
Yeah.
Any objection, consent? All items have been commenced, are addressed off of consent. All public comment, all asserted public comment requirements have been satisfied. ¿Algo más? Is there something more? No, sir. Again, I want to thank all those who came in this afternoon, for the most part, and appreciate your attention. Rose, what a wonderful day it's been to see you, and with that, the meeting is adjourned.